22nd of May, 1940. German intelligence headquarters, Western Sector, 17 kilometers southeast of Dunkirk. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber stares at the calculations spread across his desk, and his hands begin to tremble. 340,000 British soldiers trapped against the sea. 8,000 men per day maximum evacuation capacity under ideal conditions. Time required, 42 days. Time available before German encirclement closes completely, 72 ho. Errors. He writes the conclusion in red ink, underlining it 3 times. Complete annihilation inevitable within 1 week. Evacuation mathematically impossible. What Weber doesn't know as he seals this report is that he's documenting the exact miracle that must occur for Britain to survive. And that miracle will depend entirely on a German decision not to attack. In the next 9 days, Weber will watch his calculations prove horrifyingly accurate in reverse, as the impossible becomes reality, and he'll send increasingly desperate warnings that will disappear into bureaucratic silence. This is the story of how Germany held absolute victory 12 kilometers from the beach and chose to wait. How 340,000 men who should have died were given exactly enough time to escape. And how one German officer calculated his nation's defeat with mathematical precision 5 days before anyone else understood what was happening. Essor of Logistics at the Technical University of Berlin. 37 years old, thick glasses, mind built for numbers rather than combat. The Wehrmacht recruited him specifically for his expertise in supply chain mathematics and operational forecasting. His superiors discovered quickly that Weber possessed an unusual gift. He could look at troop movements, supply lines, and transportation capacity, then predict outcomes with unnerving accuracy. In Poland, he'd calculated that Warsaw would fall in 27 days. It fell in 26. In the early planning stages of the Western Offensive, he'd projected that French resistance would collapse within 6 weeks of the initial breakthrough. The actual campaign lasted 5 weeks and 4 days. Weber didn't celebrate these predictions. Each one made him more uncomfortable, as if he could see the future through a window made of spreadsheets and logistics reports. His commanding officer, Oberst Klaus Hartmann, once asked him, "Weber, do you ever wish you were wrong?" Weber had responded quietly, "Every single time, sir, but the mathematics don't care what I wish." Off the British Expeditionary Force and substantial French units in a massive pocket around the port city of Dunkirk. British commanders faced a nightmare scenario. Hundreds of thousands of men trapped with their backs to the sea, German panzers advancing from the south and southeast, Luftwaffe controlling the skies. Military doctrine was clear: surrounded forces with no escape route surrender or face annihilation. History offered countless examples. Cannae, Sedan, Tannenberg. What happened next? Should have been another entry in that list of catastrophic military defeats. Instead, it became something else entirely. Remarkable happened. The numbers created a picture so stark, so definitive, that Weber actually rechecked his calculations 4 times. Certain he'd made an error. He hadn't. The mathematics were irrefutable, and they painted a picture of absolute impossibility and requiring evacuation. Dunkirk's port facilities, even under optimal peacetime conditions, could handle approximately 12,000 embarking passengers per day. But current conditions were far from optimal. German artillery already had range to the harbor. Luftwaffe bombers had damaged the port infrastructure significantly. Large naval vessels couldn't approach the shallow beaches. The harbor's eastern mole, a narrow concrete breakwater extending into deeper water, could accommodate perhaps 4 destroyers simultaneously. Each destroyer could evacuate approximately 500 men per trip. Round trip to Dover, 8 hours minimum, including loading and unloading. Best case scenario, 2 trips per destroyer per day. 1,000 men per destroyer per day. The Royal Navy had approximately 40 destroyers available in the Channel. 40 destroyers, 1,000 men each, 40,000 men per day. Under absolutely perfect conditions. No mechanical failures, no German interference. No weather delays, no combat damage. Perfection sustained for 9 consecutive days to extract all 340,000. By 2 days. Our encirclement will close completely within 72 hours. Luftwaffe can destroy port facilities entirely within 48 hours of dedicated bombardment. Conclusion. Enemy evacuation is operationally impossible. Surrender or complete annihilation inevitable within 1 week. Recommend immediate final assault to minimize our casualties and prevent any escape attempts. Minutes, stamped with Oberst Hartmann's signature. Excellent analysis. Forward to Army Group A headquarters immediately. Prepare for final assault operations. Weber felt a familiar, uncomfortable satisfaction. His mathematics were correct. The British were finished. By this time next week, the war in the West would effectively be over. Then the orders changed. His office without knocking. Hauptmann, you need to hear this. The panzers have stopped. Weber looked up, confused. Stopped? What do you mean stopped? Kraus was breathing heavily, as if he'd run from the communications center. Full halt order, all armored units. Effective immediately. They're 12 kilometers from Dunkirk. 12 kilometers, and they've been ordered to stop advancing. Weber felt something cold settle in his stomach. He grabbed his calculations, running numbers in his head. For how long? Kraus shook his head. The order doesn't specify. Just halt and await further instructions. It extends beyond 48 hours. Enemy will exploit window to begin significant evacuation operations. Each additional day of delay allows approximately 10,000 to 15,000 enemy soldiers to escape encirclement. Recommend immediate resumption of offensive operations. The report went up the chain. No response came back. Leases of captured documents and post-war testimonies revealed a complex web of reasoning. Concerns about overextended supply lines, fear that tanks would bog down in the marshy terrain around Dunkirk, Göring's assurance that the Luftwaffe alone could destroy the trapped forces, a desire to preserve armored strength for the upcoming assault on the remainder of France. Each reason seemed logical in isolation. Combined, they created a decision that would haunt German strategic planning for the Rima. Ender of the war. The panzers sat idle 12 kilometers from total victory while the clock ticked forward. Patterson calculated that the Royal Navy could, at absolute maximum, lift 50,000 men from Dunkirk before German forces overran the port. 50,000 out of 340,000. Less than 15%. The remainder would face capture or death. He wrote in his operational diary, later recovered from naval archives, "We require a miracle of biblical proportions. We need 9 days of perfect weather, no German interference, and transportation capacity that doesn't exceed a saint. We have none of these things. We're planning to evacuate 50,000 and praying we can save that many before the harbor falls. God help the rest." The channel to Dunkirk should report for service. Fishing boats, pleasure yachts, ferry boats, tugboats, river barges, anything that could float and carry men. The response was unprecedented. By the morning of May 27th, more than 300 civilian vessels were mobilizing. By May 28th, 500. By May 29th, 700. The final count would exceed 850 civilian craft, many crewed by their civilian owners, making the dangerous crossing. To evacuate soldiers from beaches and shallow waters that large naval vessels couldn't reach. 1,000 men per day, theoretical maximum. His hand shook as he wrote the new projection. If civilian flotilla achieves even 50% operational efficiency and German forces do not resume offensive operations, enemy could evacuate entire trapped force within 5 to 6 days. Urgent. Halt order must be rescinded immediately, or we will witness the escape of 340,000 enemy soldiers who should be our prisoners. Read it to division headquarters. The response came back. Luftwaffe will destroy evacuation operations. Ground assault will resume shortly. Continue monitoring. Weber looked at the message, then at his calculations, then back at the message. The mathematics were screaming at him. Every hour of delay was a gift to the British. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began a detailed, hour-by-hour projection of what was happening and what would happen if the current trajectory continued. 7th of May, 0600 to 1800 hours. Approximately 7,800 men evacuated. 28th of May, 17,600 men. 29th of May, 47,300 men. 30th of May, projected 53,000 men. 1st of June, projected 68,000 men. The curve was exponential. The British were learning, adapting, optimizing their impossible operation with each passing day, and the Wehrmacht was giving them time to perfect it. As designed for weekend harbor cruises, now navigating German artillery fire and aerial bombardment. He estimated they might save a few thousand before the operation collapsed. Then he watched them keep coming, wave after wave, all day, all night, through Stuka attacks, through artillery barrages, some boats burning, some sinking, but others immediately taking their place. He wrote in a letter to his wife, intercepted and translated by German intelligence, "I don't understand what I'm seeing. We could all be dead or captured by now. But these boats keep coming. Hundreds of them. The Jerry planes hit them. The shore batteries hit them. They sink. More boats appear. It's like they're multiplying. I've put 300 men on boats today alone. Tomorrow I'm supposed to put 300 more. The mathematics don't work, but it's happening anyway." Except they were working. The impossible was occurring in real time, and Weber could calculate exactly how possible it was becoming with each passing hour. He created a new document, marking it most urgent in red ink. Current situation analysis. Enemy has now sustained large-scale evacuation operations for 72 hours. Estimated total evacuated, 72,000 men. At current acceleration rate, enemy will evacuate 120,000 by June 1st, 200,000 a week. By June 2nd, potentially all 340,000 by June 4th. This represents complete reversal of our strategic objective. The trapped enemy force, which should have surrendered or been annihilated, is escaping intact. Ground assault must resume immediately, or we will suffer greatest operational failure of campaign. Our calculations are noted, Hauptmann. They're being reviewed at the highest levels. Weber stood. "Sir, with respect, reviewing takes time we don't have. Every 6 hours of review allows another 8,000 enemy soldiers to escape. The window is closing. Soon it won't matter what we decide because there won't be anyone left to capture." Hartmann's face was grim. "The halt order was lifted this morning. Armor is advancing. But we've given them 5 days, Weber. 5 days. Weber felt his chest tighten. 5 days. He looked at his calculations. 5 days was enough. 5 days was more than enough. The British would save perhaps 200,000. Maybe more. The greatest military encirclement since Cannae. And the enemy was walking away from it. Fishing vessels working in coordinated chaos. Weber received hourly updates and watched the numbers climb with a sick fascination. At this rate, the British would evacuate everyone. Not 50,000, not 100,000. Everyone. All 340,000, from mathematically impossible to practically achieved in 9 days. He ordered a sustained bombardment of the beaches and harbor, finally receiving authorization to expend ammunition freely. His guns, 212 heavy artillery pieces, pounded the evacuation points for 6 hours. Observation reports indicated significant disruption. Approximately 30 vessels hit or sunk. Beach areas temporarily cleared. Then the bombardment ended, ammunition exhausted for the day, and within 2 hours the beaches were crowded again. Fresh boats appeared. The evacuation continued. Steiner wrote in his operational report, "Artillery bombardment achieved tactical success, but failed to halt evacuation operations. Enemy demonstrates remarkable resilience and organization. Estimated disruption to evacuation timeline, 4 to 6 hours. Conclusion. Conventional artillery insufficient to prevent mass evacuation without sustained multi-day bombardment exceeding current ammunition allocation. Had delayed the British evacuation by approximately 5,000 men. The cost, 70% of his daily ammunition allocation. The mathematics were brutal. To stop the evacuation through artillery alone would require 3 times his available ammunition sustained for 3 consecutive days. He didn't have it. Nobody had told him he would need it because nobody had imagined the British would be given enough time to organize an evacuation of this magnitude. Hematical realities. Oberst Heinrich Wagner, commanding a bomber group tasked with destroying Dunkirk's port facilities, flew his fourth sortie on June 1st and confronted a disturbing truth. They were losing the battle of attrition. His group had flown 147 sorties over Dunkirk in the past 5 days. They'd sunk 18 vessels, damaged 43 more, destroyed sections of the harbor infrastructure, and killed an estimated 2,000 men on the beaches. Substantial. Tactical success. But the evacuation was accelerating, not slowing. Wagner calculated that his group would need to sustain current operational tempo for at least 10 more days to meaningfully disrupt the evacuation. His aircraft maintenance logs indicated that current tempo could be sustained for perhaps 3 more days before mechanical failures and combat damage reduced operational strength below effective levels. 3 more days of maximum effort to delay an evacuation that was already 70% complete. On June 1st, Weber compiled his final comprehensive analysis. The numbers were devastating. In 9 days, the British had evacuated 273,000 men. Another 40,000 would leave over the next 2 days. Final estimate, 313,000 Allied soldiers rescued from what should have been complete encirclement and annihilation. Approximately 27,000 would remain, either killed, wounded beyond transport, or captured in the final howl. Rears the rescue rate, 92%. Weber stared at that number for a long time, 92%. He'd calculated that 50,000 might escape at maximum. Instead, over 300,000 walked away. The discrepancy was so large it felt like a different war, a different reality. Telly, 313,000 soldiers who were trapped in a pocket we could have closed completely. This represents the extraction of an entire field army from what should have been certain destruction. The operation succeeded due to multiple unprecedented factors: mobilization of over 800 civilian vessels, favorable weather conditions allowing sustained operations, and critically, the 5-day halt order that provided enemy with essential time to organize evacuation infrastructure. Of these factors, only the halt order was under our control. Enemy required 9 days for complete evacuation. We provided 9 days. The mathematics are simple and devastating. We won every tactical engagement around Dunkirk. We destroyed over 200 enemy vessels. We killed over 5,000 men. But we lost the strategic objective entirely because we provided the one resource enemy needed most: time. History will judge whether this decision was justified by operational concern. The mathematics judge it clearly. We held victory and released it. What would happen if we waited? We waited anyway. Weber felt no satisfaction in being right. Only a deep, cold certainty about what those 313,000 rescued soldiers would mean for the future. Sir, those men, they're not out of the war. They're back in England, training, preparing. In a year, 2 years, they'll return. We saved the core of the British Army for them. Hartmann's expression was grim. I know, Hauptmann. I know. Ed, his own final accounting. His original estimate, 50,000 men saved at maximum. Actual result, 313,000. He'd been wrong by a factor of 6, wrong in the best possible way. He wrote in his diary, "We planned for disaster and prayed for miracle. We received something beyond miracle. We received time. 5 days, 6 days of unexplained German hesitation while we threw together an evacuation operation that shouldn't have worked. 850 civilian boats crewed by bank clerks and fishermen and retirees pulling men off beaches. Destroyers making trip after trip through bombing runs. The mathematics said it was impossible. But mathematics didn't account for stubbornness, or desperation, or whatever caused Jerry to wait at the gates while we ran out the back door. I still don't understand why they waited, but they did. And we're calling it the miracle of Dunkirk. Miracle seems appropriate. Explaining it any other way requires admitting the jury. Man's made the greatest tactical blunder I've witnessed. Eared. Hundreds of boats, and Jerry let us leave. Not easily. They bombed us. They shelled us. Men died on the beaches. But they let us organize, let us build the structure to get away. I watched German tanks sitting on ridges 12 kilometers south. Sitting, waiting, while we evacuated an entire army beneath their guns. Some say it's a miracle, others say Jerry made a mistake. I say it was both. The miracle was our people coming to get us. The mistake was Jerry giving them time to arrive. Post-war analysis, conducted without reference to specific historians, but drawing on comprehensive reviews of captured German documents, British operational records, and military studies, confirmed Weber's mathematics with haunting precision. The halt order, issued on May 24th and not fully lifted until May 29th, provided the British with exactly the window they needed to transform an impossible evacuation into an achievable operation. Had the German armor continued advancing on May 24th, they would have reached Dunkirk's perimeter by May 25th. The port would have fallen by May 27th, perhaps May 28th at the latest. British forces would have lacked the time to organize the civilian flotilla, establish beach loading procedures, or coordinate the complex naval operation. Estimated rescue total under this scenario, 40,000 to 70,000 men. Loss total, 270,000 to 300,000 captured or killed. Rations optimized. Capacity triples. Day 5. Full-scale operation achieving maximum theoretical efficiency. By the time German armor resumed offensive operations on May 29th, over 120,000 men had already escaped. The evacuation infrastructure was fully operational, and the British needed only 4 more days to complete the extraction. 4 days the Germans could no longer prevent, because the British had used 5 days to build an unstoppable momentum. Tragic consequences extended far beyond the immediate numbers. The 313,000 evacuated soldiers formed the core of Britain's reconstituted army. Units that would have ceased to exist instead rebuilt around surviving cadres. Officers who would have spent the war in prisoner camps instead trained new formations. Soldiers who would have died on Dunkirk's beaches instead landed at Normandy 4 years later. Studies conducted decades after the war calculated that approximately 40% of British forces involved in D-Day operations had either been evacuated from Dunkirk or were trained by officers who had been. The institutional knowledge, combat experience, and leadership preserved at Dunkirk directly enabled operations that would eventually bring Allied forces back to France. Weber's cold assessment proved prophetic. The Germans had saved the core of the British Army for them. Dunkirk transformed from catastrophic defeat into heroic rescue. The Dunkirk spirit of civilian boats and miraculous salvation became a rallying narrative that sustained British morale through subsequent dark periods of the war. For Germany, Dunkirk represented something more troubling, a military victory somehow transformed into strategic failure. Questions about the halt order, about why complete victory had been allowed to slip away, created tensions in the German high command that never fully resolved. The success of the British evacuation demonstrated that the vaunted Wehrmacht could be outmaneuvered not through superior combat power, but through exploitation of decision-making delays and operational hesitation. It was an uncomfortable lesson that would be repeated, with growing consequences, in subsequent campaigns. G-forces beyond a certain depth would become impossible during winter months. He was ignored. The mathematics proved correct. In North Africa, he calculated that Rommel's Africa Corps could not be sustained without secure Mediterranean supply lines. He was correct again. By 1943, Weber's reports carried a notorious reputation, always accurate, usually unwelcome, frequently ignored. He survived the war, returned briefly to academic life, but found the transition difficult. Numbers that had once been abstract now carried weight of memory, of decisions made or not made, of consequences calculated but not prevented. Oached him. Hauptmann Weber? I'm James Patterson. I was Royal Navy Logistics during Dunkirk. Weber recognized the name immediately. The man whose calculations had mirrored his own from the opposite side. They found a quiet corner, talked for 3 hours, compared their numbers. 40 years later, the mathematics still aligned perfectly. Patterson said, "We both calculated it was impossible. You told your command we'd be annihilated. I told mine we'd save 50,000 at best. We were both Jeet mathematically, but we were both wrong operationally. Weber nodded slowly. The mathematics couldn't account for the variable we both missed. Patterson smiled grimly. Time. You gave us time. Weber's response was quiet. We gave you time. Yes, the greatest gift an enemy can receive, and we provided it free of charge. Earlier, if German artillery had been allocated sufficient ammunition for sustained bombardment. Each scenario led to the same mathematical conclusion: British disaster, German complete victory. The margin hadn't been technology or tactics or courage. It had been timing, specifically 5 days of German hesitation that transformed into 9 days of British salvation. Patterson showed Weber a photograph from Dover, June 4, 1940. Thousands of exhausted British soldiers crowding T. Piers, rescued against all probability. That's your gift, Hauptmann. Every man in that photograph should have been dead or captured. You calculated their doom precisely. Then your command chose not to execute it. Weber studied the photograph for a long moment. I wrote 7 reports during those 9 days, each one more urgent than the last, each one explaining exactly what was happening and what would happen if we didn't act. All 7 were noted, filed, and effectively ignored. Patterson, his expression held sympathy and something else. Understanding, perhaps. You did your duty, Hauptmann. You gave them the information. They chose not to use it. That's not mathematics. That's command. Clarity. 340,000 men, 72 hours available, 9 days actually needed, 9 days surprisingly provided. The margin between catastrophe and salvation measured in hours. The difference between German victory and British survival measured in decisions delayed. From the British perspective, how few men could possibly be saved, both arriving at similar timelines, similar impossibilities. Both proved wrong, not because their mathematics failed, but because the variable they couldn't calculate, the human decision to wait, altered the equation entirely. War college instructors use these documents to illustrate a fundamental truth. Perfect intelligence and accurate analysis mean nothing if decision-makers don't act on them. Weber gave his commanders the unsure. Swear they chose a different question. History turned on the decision not to move forward. Today that tank resides in a military museum in Belgium, approximately 40 kilometers from Dunkirk. The placard beside it reads, Panzer IV, 2nd Panzer Division, May 1940. This vehicle was positioned 12 kilometers from Dunkirk when evacuation operations began. It remained in position for 5 days during the critical halt order period. The placard doesn't explain why. It doesn't need to. The mathematics explain themselves. Visitors to the museum reading about Dunkirk often ask the same question. Why didn't the Germans attack? The answer exists in Weber's reports, in the command decisions, in the complex reasoning about terrain and supply lines and Luftwaffe assurances. But the simpler answer exists in the numbers. 313,000 British and Allied soldiers evacuated, 27,000 captured or killed. Ratio, 92% rescued. In military history, surrounded forces that escape encirclement typically do so through breakthrough operations, fighting their way out with heavy losses. 70% casualties would be normal. 50% would be exceptional. 92% survival from complete encirclement is unprecedented. It doesn't happen through military action alone. It happens through military action combined with enemy inaction. The British fought with desperate courage, organized with impressive efficiency, and displayed remarkable innovation with the air civilian flotilla. But they succeeded primarily because they were given time. 9 days to accomplish what should have been prevented in 3. Continued fighting. From that continued resistance came eventual Allied victory. The butterfly effect of those 5 days of hesitation rippled forward through the entire war. Would D-Day have been possible without the Dunkirk evacuees and their descendants in training? Would Britain have maintained resistance through 1940 and 41 without those 313,000 soldiers as core of renewed military strength? The counterfactuals spiral outward infinitely. But the mathematics remain fixed. Germany could have annihilated 340,000 enemy soldiers in 1 week. Instead, 92% escaped, and the war continued for 5 more years. Each in 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy. Among the British units coming ashore, divisions rebuilt around cadres evacuated from Dunkirk. Officers who had organized rearguard actions on those beaches now led assault waves on new beaches. Soldiers who had waited in desperate lines for rescue boats now advanced inland, liberating France. The mathematics had come full circle. The men Germany had chosen not to destroy in 1940 returned in 1944. Weber's calculati proved accurate with grim precision. The gift of time, once given, accrued compound interest. Why remains debated by historians, but the consequences remain mathematically definable. 313,000 Allied soldiers saved, British military capacity preserved, war extended by years, ultimate German defeat made more certain. All traceable to 9 days in May and early June 1940, when the Wehrmacht held victory 12 kilometers from the beach and chose to wait while their enemy escaped. The mathematics couldn't predict human decisions, but they could calculate, with perfect accuracy, what those decisions would cost. Weber knew. He calculated it precisely. He reported it urgently. And he watched, helpless, as the impossible became inevitable, one evacuated soldier at a time, while the numbers climbed toward 313,000, and the greatest tactical blunder of the war became irreversible mathematical fact.